Welcome to Today I Will Take You on a Journey into My Own World. The Last Light in Castle Mourne. Everyone in the valley knew one rule. If you see a light in the castle windows, run. Petra was the first person in 100 years to walk toward it instead. The light appeared on the night of the full moon, exactly as it had every year for as long as anyone could remember. And every year, every single person in the valley locked their doors and did not look. Petra Vane looked. She was not reckless. She was a surveyor, which meant she had a professional relationship with the accurate measurement of space and distance and the properties of the physical world, and recklessness had no place in that relationship. She had surveyed cliffs and flooded valleys and one memorably unstable mine shaft in the north, and she had done it carefully, methodically, with the correct equipment and appropriate safety margins. She was 28 years old, and she had never done anything that could reasonably be called impulsive. The light in Castle Mourne was a professional matter. That was what she told herself as she put on her boots at 11:15 on a moonlit October night, while her host, the innkeeper's wife of the village of Veld, stood in the kitchen doorway with both hands clasped over her mouth, and her eyes large with something that was more than ordinary fear. Petra had been hired to survey the castle grounds. The estate had been purchased by a development company based in a city far enough away that it had no relationship with the castle's local mythology, and the development company wanted to know what they had bought. She had been given a key to the outer gate. She had been given a map that was 60 years old and probably inaccurate. She had been given a fee that was higher than her usual rate, which she had not questioned, because surveyors who ask too many questions about why the fee is high don't get hired for the interesting jobs. The castle sat on a hill at the valley's northern end, exactly where it had sat for 600 years, with the full moon directly behind it, as though the moon had been placed there specifically for dramatic effect. The castle was Gothic, genuinely Gothic, not the Victorian approximation, built in the 14th century from the black stone quarried out of the hill itself, so that the building and the hill were made of the same material and seemed to grow from each other organically. It had 7 towers of varying height. Ivy covered the lower sections in patterns that looked, in moonlight, like writing in a language that used only curves. The light was in a window on the 4th floor of the central tower. A warm light, candlelight, or something that moved the way candlelight moves. Petra noted this in her field book. She noted the window's approximate position, the quality and color of the light, the time. Then she unlocked the outer gate and went in. The grounds were overgrown but not impassable. The path from the gate to the main entrance had been gravel at some point and was now mostly moss, but the line of it was still legible, and she followed it without difficulty. The moon was so bright she did not need her torch. The castle's shadow stretched behind it down the hill like something the building was dragging, something it couldn't put down. The main door was unlocked. This was not in the materials she had been given. The materials had included a key to the main door, which she had tested at the gate and which fit, but the door was already open. Not standing open, just unlocked, the latch unengaged, swinging inward at the pressure of her hand with the ease of a door that has recently been used. She stood in the doorway and listened. The castle's interior was dark except for what the moonlight pushed through the narrow windows. It smelled of cold stone and dust, and something she couldn't identify immediately. Something organic. Something that had been here a long time. The kind of smell that accumulates in places where things grow that don't need light. Then, footsteps. Above her. Deliberate, unhurried, moving from somewhere to somewhere with the purposeful quality of someone who knows the space and is not afraid of it. Petra went up the stairs. The staircase in the central tower was stone, built into the wall, circling upward in the tight spiral of medieval construction. She climbed 4 floors. On the 4th floor landing, light leaked under a door. That warm, moving light she had seen from the valley below. She knocked. This was, she felt, the correct approach. She had a key and a commission and a professional reason to be here, and knocking was what one did. A voice said, "Come in." The room was a library. Floor to ceiling, every wall, shelves made of the same black stone as the rest of the castle, fitted with wooden boards that had warped and straightened over centuries into something almost organic. The books on them were enormous. Folios, the large format books of another era, their spines plain or marked, with symbols she didn't recognize. In the center of the room, a table. On the table, 3 candles and a woman. The woman was old. Not merely old, ancient in the way that certain things are ancient, carrying their age visibly in every surface, the way cliffs carry the record of their own formation in their strata. She was small and very straight in her chair, dressed in black that had probably once been a specific and elegant cut, and was now simply old black fabric shaped by decades of the same body. Her hair was white and pinned with apparent indifference. Her eyes, when she looked up from the book she was reading, were the color of the moonlight outside. She said, "You are the surveyor." Petra said yes. The woman said, "They sent a woman this time. The last 4 were men. The last 4 did not come inside." Petra said, "The door was open." The woman said, "It is always open. That is not the same as being easy to enter. Sit down." There was a second chair. Petra sat in it. Her field book was in her hand. She was aware, in the way she was always aware on unusual sights, of the specific data of the space around her. The temperature, cold, but not as cold as the unheated stone suggested it should be. The sound, almost nothing, the castle's thick walls absorbing even the wind. The light, the 3 candles illuminating a circle of approximately 4 meters and leaving the rest of the vast library in deep shadow. The woman's name was Serafina Mourne. She was the last of the family that had built the castle and the last of the family that had lived in it, and she was 107 years old. She did not say this as though it were remarkable. She said it the way one states a professionally relevant fact. Petra wrote it in her field book. Then she looked up and said, "How?" Serafina smiled. It was a thin smile, the smile of someone for whom smiling was not a primary mode of expression, but who found the question appropriate. She said, The castle is very old. Things that live in very old things sometimes become old themselves. I was born here. I will die here. The interval has been longer than expected." She paused. "I am not a ghost," she said, anticipating the question. "I am not a vampire, which is what the village believes, which is flattering in its own way, but incorrect. I am simply a very old woman in a very old house. and the house has been good to me." Petra sat with this for a moment. Then she said, "The development company. They want to convert this place." Serafina said, "Yes, into flats. I have read the plans. The library would become 12 units of accommodation." She looked around at the books with an expression that was not quite grief and not quite contempt. "They do not know I am here. They have never asked." Petra said, "I'll be filing a survey report." Serafina said, "I know." A long silence. Outside, the moon moved. Its light shifted through the narrow windows, the angle changing slowly, the shadows of the stone mullions crossing, the floor like slow hands of a clock. Petra said, "What is in the books?" And Serafina's expression changed. Not dramatically, but something in it opened, the way a very old door opens when the right key is found, slowly, with the weight of long disuse, but fully, all the way. She said, "Everything. 600 years of everything. My family kept records of the land, the weather, the people of the valley, the way the stone of the hill changes with the seasons, the behavior of the aquifer beneath us, the patterns of storm and drought. 600 years of observations, unbroken, continuous. There is no archive in the world like it. There is nothing else that has been watching this particular piece of ground for this length of time." Petra looked at the shelves, at the folios, at the density of recorded time pressing against the warped wooden boards. She said, "The development company doesn't know." Serafina said, "No one knows. The castle has a reputation that keeps people away. I have." Found this useful. Petra's survey report, filed 3 weeks later, noted significant structural concerns with the fourth-floor library. It noted the presence of an occupant, legally documented, with evidence of continuous residency that predated the development company's purchase and which had not been disclosed during the sale, creating a legal complication that would take considerable time to resolve. It noted that the library's contents were of potential historical significance and recommended a full archival assessment before any structural work proceeded. She also sent a separate private letter to a professor of historical climatology at a university in the north, describing what she had seen. The professor's response arrived in 4 days. It used the word extraordinary 7 times and requested, with barely suppressed urgency, an introduction. "The development company's plans have been on hold for 3 years. The legal complication has proven, in fact, considerable." Serafina. Mourne continues to read by candlelight on the night of the full moon, in the library on the 4th floor of the central tower of Castle Mourne, exactly as she has done for longer than anyone in the valley below can accurately remember. The light in the window appears, and the villagers lock their doors, and they do not look. Most of them. The Cartographer's Ghost. The map was perfect. Every street, every alley, every building, exactly right. It had been drawn in 1847. The city it showed did not exist until 1923. Professor Aldrich Sen had been studying impossible things for 30 years, and he had learned to distrust his own excitement. So when the map arrived at his office in a brown envelope with no return address, he sat with it for a full hour before he allowed himself to believe what he was looking at. The map was old. That was the first thing. Old in the specific way of archival documents, the paper foxed and browned at the edges, the ink faded to the warm sepia of age, the fold lines worn to near transparency at their creases. He dated it, provisionally, at mid-19th century, consistent with the paper stock and the style of cartographic notation. A city map. Detailed, professional, the work of someone with genuine skill. The kind of survey map produced for municipal planning rather than the decorative maps made for wealthy clients. The city it showed was Velmore. Aldrich knew Velmore. He had been born there. He had lived there for 60 of his 71 years. He knew its streets the way people know the rooms of their childhood home, not as a map, but as a felt sense of space, a body knowledge of distances and angles and the specific smells associated with particular corners. The map showed Velmore correctly. That was what stopped him. Every major street in the correct position, every district boundary in the right place. The river curve through the eastern quarter, the plaza at the city's center, the arrangement of the old quarters, winding lanes, all of it correct, all of it rendered with the surveyor's precision of actual measurement rather than approximate recollection. Velmore had been built in 1923. Before 1923, the land on which it stood had been farmland. There was no city to map in 1847. There was no reason for anyone to have surveyed it. There was nothing there. He turned the map over. On the back, in a different hand than the cartographic notations, a smaller, more personal script written in brown ink that had bled slightly into the paper fibers, a single sentence. "I have seen what will be here, and I have written it down so that when it comes, someone will know I was watching." No name, no date, no other markings. Aldrich spent 3 weeks on provenance before he told anyone. He had the paper analyzed, consistent with European manufacturing between 1840 and 1860. The ink, iron gall, period appropriate. The cartographic style, consistent with German survey school of the mid-19th century, the notation system matching standard training of that period. Everything about the physical object said 1847. Everything about its contents said impossible. He told his colleague, Dr. Merritt, over lunch. Merritt was a historian specializing in the pre-settlement period of the region, and was constitutionally skeptical in a way Aldrich found professionally valuable and personally exhausting. Merritt studied the map for a long time. Then she said, "It's a forgery." Aldrich said, "The paper is genuine. The ink is genuine. The aging is genuine. Faking that level of physical authenticity requires techniques that didn't exist when forgers would have had reason to fake it." Merritt said, "Then it's a coincidence. The city plan resembles Velmore, but isn't actually Velmore." Aldrich spread the map on the table and placed beside it a current city map of Velmore. He aligned them. The correspondence was not approximate. It was exact, within the measurement tolerances of 19th century surveying equipment. Merritt looked at both maps for a very long time. Then she said, "Where did you get this?" He told her. She found this less satisfying than she would have liked. They spent 6 months on the investigation. They traced the paper manufacturer to a mill in what was now southern Germany, active from 1831 to 1879. They identified the ink formulation as one of 3 common iron gall recipes in use in that period. They found a style match for the cartographic notation in the work of a surveying school in Heidelberg that operated in the 1840s. They found, in the archive of a small museum in a town that had once been the largest settlement in the region before Velmore was built, a collection of documents belonging to a surveyor named Johann Caspar Wirtz. Born 1809, died 1861, trained in Heidelberg. worked in the region from 1838 until his death. Wurtz's archive was modest: field notebooks, client correspondence, a handful of completed survey maps for farms, and one small town that no longer existed. And a private journal written in German, which had never been translated because no one had considered it significant. Murray translated it. The journal covered the last 4 years of Wurtz's life, and it was, for its first half, the ordinary professional journal of a methodical and somewhat lonely man. Survey commissions undertaken, measurements recorded, distances traveled, weather endured. He wrote about his work with care, and about his life with very little. A few mentions of his landlady, a recurring note about a knee injury that troubled him in cold weather. Then, in the spring of 1857, something changed. He wrote, "For 3 nights running I have dreamed of a city. Not a city I know, a city that does not exist. I have dreamed it with the precision of a survey, as though I were walking it with instruments, taking measurements, recording elevations and angles. I wake with numbers in my head. I have begun writing them down." Over the following months, the journal documented a process that Wurtz himself described as involuntary and increasingly consuming. He dreamed the city. He woke and recorded what he had dreamed: measurements, orientations, the relationships between spaces. He began, gradually, to construct a map from the accumulated dream data. He checked it internally for consistency. He found it consistent. He checked it against surveying principles. It behaved as a real survey of real terrain. He wrote, "I am not a man who believes in visions. I am a man who believes in measurement. But I am measuring something. I do not know what. I am mapping a place I have never been, perhaps a place that does not exist. And the map is accurate. Accurate in the way that only contact with real things produces accuracy. I do not know what to make of this." He completed the map in 1858. He wrote, "It is done. I do not know what it is for. I do not know who will need it. I am writing this on the back so that whoever finds it will know this is not imagination. This is record. This is the most faithful survey I have ever produced. I have seen what will be here, and I have written it down so that when it comes, someone will know I was watching." He died 3 years later. The map passed through his estate to a nephew who found it incomprehensible and stored it without interest. It passed through 3 more hands over the following century and a half before it arrived in a brown envelope on Aldrich's desk. The paper presenting their findings was published in a journal of historical cartography and received, predictably, significant skepticism. The physical evidence was not disputed. The interpretation was. Alternative explanations were proposed. Coincidence, a lost pre-settlement plan for a city that had been considered and then abandoned, and then independently replanned along similar lines. Some form of fraud, more sophisticated than current analysis could detect. Aldrich found none of these explanations satisfying. He did not find his own explanation satisfying either. It was not an explanation so much as a description of an anomaly. He had spent 30 years studying impossible things, and he had learned that some impossible things are simply waiting for a framework that doesn't yet exist to make them comprehensible.
He kept Wurtz's map on the wall of his office. He kept it there until he retired, and then he kept it on the wall of his study at home, where he could see it from the chair where he drank his morning coffee. He drank his coffee, and he looked at the map of a city that a man had dreamed in a farmland that would not become a city for another 66 years. And he thought about what it meant to watch something that hasn't happened yet with enough attention to draw it accurately. He thought about this for a long time. He never arrived at an answer he was entirely satisfied with. But the question, he felt, was one of the better ones he had been given. That, in the end, seemed like enough.
What the mountain kept. The expedition had been missing for 40 years. The survivor walked out of the glacier with her original equipment and her original notes, and not one day older than the morning she had gone in. Dr. Lena Bauer walked into the base camp at 6:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in September, and the base camp crew, who had heard a sound they could not identify coming from the direction of the upper glacier, went very still when they saw her. Because Dr. Lena Bauer had disappeared on the Kesmer Glacier 40 years ago, and she was 34 years old, she was wearing the gear of her original expedition, the orange anorak of a style discontinued in the mid-1980s, the crampon bindings of a design replaced by more efficient versions 15 years ago. Her pack was the pack logged on the manifest of the 1984 Kesmer expedition, identifiable by the faded repair patch on the left shoulder strap that a base camp photograph clearly showed her making the morning of the last day anyone had seen her. She walked into base camp and looked at the people staring at her and said, "Is there coffee? I've been in the ice for what feels like about 6 hours, and I am very cold." The base camp crew, part of a glaciological survey team with no connection to the original expedition, gave her coffee. Then they gave her a satellite phone. Then they sat very quietly while she made a call to a number she said was her department at the university, and the call failed because the number was no longer in service. Then they told her the year. She received this information with the stillness of a scientist receiving data that disrupts a working model. She sat with the coffee cup between her hands, and she looked at the steam rising from it, and she was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "Tell me everything you know about where I've been." What they knew was limited. The 1984 Kesmer expedition had been a 6-person team studying glacier movement in the high alpine. On September 14, 1984, 3 members of the team had descended to a lower camp due to weather. Dr. Lena Bauer, the expedition lead, and 2 other researchers had continued up toward the survey site. A storm had moved in faster than forecast. The 3 upper camp researchers had not returned. A search had found no trace of them, not on the glacier, not in the crevasse systems, not anywhere. The glacier had been searched again the following summer. Nothing. The 3 researchers were declared dead in 1987. Lena said, "What happened to the other 2? Marcus and Tova?" They had to tell her. They had done a search between her account and what they could access on their laptops. Marcus Hellner had been declared dead with her. Tova Osk had been declared dead with her. There was no record of either of them surviving. Lena said nothing for a while. Then she said, "They were with me when we went into the crevasse. We fell. The surface collapsed. It was a snow bridge. There was no warning. We fell into the ice." She stopped. She looked at the glacier through the tent door. She said, "It was like a room. That's the only way I can describe it. A room inside the glacier. Blue walls, blue light. It was not dark. The ice conducts light somehow. There was enough to see. We were intact. The fall should have killed us, and it didn't. We were on an ice shelf, a natural formation, and below us the crevasse went down further than our torches reached. She looked at the coffee cup. She said, "Marcus found the passage first, on the second day. There was a way through, not back up, the opening had closed, but along, through a tunnel in the ice. We followed it. It opened into a larger space, and in that space..." She stopped again. The base camp crew waited. She said, "I'm going to say something that I would not accept from one of my own researchers without substantial evidence. So I want you to know that I understand how this sounds, and I am telling you anyway because it is what I experienced, and I am not willing to misrepresent my data. In the larger space, there was light that had no source, not bioluminescence, not reflected surface light, not any light-producing mechanism she could identify. Light that seemed to be a property of the air itself in that specific chamber. The temperature was warmer than it should have been, above freezing, inconsistent with the surrounding ice. And there was sound. A low, sustained tone, not mechanical, not biological. The kind of sound that seems less like a sound and more like a property of the space itself. They had stayed in the space for what felt like a night and a day, perhaps 18 hours. They had documented everything they could. Lena's field notebooks were in her pack, and every page of the relevant section was filled with observations, measurements, sketches, questions. She had been doing what she always did when she encountered something anomalous. She had been a scientist about it. Then, she had found the way out. A slope of ice that led upward toward a glow that turned out to be surface light. She had turned to tell the others, and she had been alone. Marcus and Tova were not behind her. She could not find them in the chamber. She searched for what felt like hours. She called until the ice threw her voice back at her from every direction, and she could not tell echo from response. Finally, she had gone up, because staying was not finding them, and the only other option was further down. And further down was a crevasse that went farther than her torch. She had come out onto the glacier surface. It had been morning. She had walked to base camp. She had walked to a base camp that was 40 years in her future. And her colleagues were somewhere in the ice, and she was 34 years old, and the coffee was getting cold. The investigation that followed was the most carefully documented and widely scrutinized case in the history of alpine research. Lena's physical state was examined exhaustively. Her age consistent with 34, her tissue and cellular structure showing no anomalies, her equipment genuinely from 1984 by every material analysis available. Her field notebooks were analyzed and dated to 1984. Her account was recorded and examined by researchers from 17 institutions. No one could explain it. Several people tried hard to disprove it and found the evidence resistant to disproof. The glacier was searched again, with technology unavailable in 1984. Ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, drone mapping of the crevasse systems. The chamber she described was not found. 2 extensive crevasse systems were mapped that had not been documented before. Marcus Hellner and Tova Osk were not found. Lena went back to academia. She was, obviously, not the same person who had left. She was of the same age, but of a different time. A researcher from 1984 dropped into a world that had moved 40 years without her. The learning curve was steep, and she described it in later interviews as the most intellectually demanding period of her life. She retrained, she updated, she learned what 40 years of glaciology had built on the foundations she had helped lay. She published one paper about the experience. One. She published it late in her career when she felt she had enough standing to withstand the response. And she published it as a data paper. Here is what I observed, here is my documentation, here is what I can and cannot conclude, without interpretation or claim. The paper was received as papers are received when their author is credible and their content is inexplicable, with great interest and no resolution. She continued to study glaciers. She studied them for 40 more years after her return, well past the retirement age of her colleagues, driven by a question she could not answer. What was in the ice? Not the light, not the warmth, not the sound. She did not know what those were. But what was the chamber a part of?
What system, what process, what property of very old ice under very specific pressure at very specific depth produced a space where time did not move the way it moved outside? She never found the answer. The glacier calved significantly in the 2030s, releasing into the meltwater a volume of ice that included, by her calculations, the approximate location of the crevasse she had fallen into. Whatever the chamber had been, it was water now, mixed into the sea with the ordinary efficiency of climate and time. She stood at the glacier's edge the summer it calved and watched the ice go. And she thought about Marcus finding the passage, and Tova's laugh in the blue light, and the sound that was not a sound, but a property of a place she would never return to. She thought, I was there. Whatever it was, I was there, and I know it existed, and the knowing is mine, and cannot be taken back, even if everything else is gone. She was 74 years old. She felt, in that moment, very young.
The Memory Broker. In 2041, you could sell your memories. Most people sold the good ones by mistake. Cass bought them back, for a price that had nothing to do with money. The first thing Cass always asked a new client was, which memory is worth more to you? The one you lost, or the one you think you're going to make? Most people didn't understand the question. That was how Cass knew they were going to be difficult. The memory trade had been legal for 11 years by the time Cass set up shop in the repurposed parking structure on the edge of the old financial district. Legal, regulated, and deeply normalized, in the way that things become normalized when they are simultaneously useful and catastrophic. The way social media had normalized before it. The way certain pharmaceuticals had. The way the tech always outran the wisdom by just far enough that by the time the wisdom caught up, there was an entire industry built on the gap. The technology was called mnemonic extraction.
Technically speaking, everyone called it mining, which was accurate in the way that ugly, accurate terms tend to be accurate. It conveyed the extraction, the depletion, the thing left behind that is not quite the same as before. You went into a clinic. They put a scanner on your head. You focused on a memory. Or they helped you locate one, because most people were surprisingly bad at identifying their own memories with any precision. The scanner isolated the neural pattern. It encoded it. It removed it from your brain with the same smooth efficiency of a file deleted from a drive. Instantly, cleanly, irreversibly.
Then you got paid. The market for memories was, like all markets, a function of supply and demand. The supply was essentially infinite. Every living human being contained decades of experience, and the demand was specific. Collectors paid premium prices for exceptional memories, the subjective experience of athletic extremity, of artistic creation at the moment of breakthrough, of grief so pure and specific that it carried within it a whole person's life as they had been understood by the one who mourned them. Corporations bought professional memories, the expertise embedded in a surgeon's hands, the market intuition of a successful trader, the negotiating instincts of a career diplomat. Research institutions bought anomalous memories, experiences that couldn't be replicated experimentally, edge cases, the memories of people who had survived things that couldn't be ethically staged. And people sold. They sold because they needed money, which was always true and always would be. They sold because the memory felt like a liability. Some people came in specifically to shed a traumatic memory, to extract the neural pattern and with it, the involuntary reliving, the 3 a.m. sudden waking. They sold because the salesperson at the clinic was skilled, and the money offered was real, and the loss was abstract, until it wasn't. Cass had worked
in a clinic for 4 years before going independent. In the clinic, they had been called a memory consultant, which meant helping clients identify and value their extractable memories. They had been good at it. They had been too good at it, which was why they had left. They understood, better than their clients, what was being given up, and the dissonance between understanding and participating had eventually become untenable. As an independent memory broker, Cass did the opposite, helped people buy back what had been sold. This was a harder business. The market for extracted memories was global, and the provenance tracking was imperfect by design, because the industry had lobbied successfully against full transparency in the secondary market. Finding a specific memory, one belonging to a specific person, sold at a specific clinic on a specific date, required skills that were partly technical, partly social, partly the kind of relentless connective thinking that Cass had always removed. And that the 4 years in the clinic had trained into something sharper and more purposeful. The client who came in on the wet Tuesday afternoon that this story is about was named Dario Fenn, and he was 31 years old, and he had sold his memory of his daughter's first year of life. He had sold it 2 years ago, when the daughter was 18 months old, and he had been in a financial crisis of the kind that feels temporary while you're in it and reveals itself as structural only in retrospect. The clinic had offered him a significant sum for it. Infant-parent bonding memories were in high demand from neurological researchers, the salesperson had explained, and his was exceptionally clear, the neural encoding unusually rich. He had taken the money. The crisis had been managed. And then the crisis had passed, and he had looked at his daughter, who was by then 2 years old, and walking and saying words and reaching for his hand, and he had understood what he had done. He sat in the chair across from Cass's desk, and he said, "I remember that she exists. I know she's mine. I know I love her." He paused. "But I don't remember her being small. I don't remember the first time she smiled. I don't remember any of it." He stopped again. "She asks me to tell her stories about when she was a baby, and I have nothing to tell her." Cass said,
You have the photographs, the videos. Dario said,
It's not the same. She knows it's not the same. She's 4. She's 4 years old, and she already knows that her father looks at photographs of her like they're photographs of someone else's child.
Cass looked at him for a moment. Then they turned to the screen. The clinic had been one of the large chains, which meant the extracted memory had entered a standardized processing pipeline. Infant-parent bonding in the first year, neuroscientifically rich and coding, it would have gone to a research buyer almost certainly. Research buyers were institutions, and institutions kept records.
The records were theoretically confidential, but practically accessible to someone who knew which doors to knock on and in what order. 3 weeks later, Cass had a location. A university neuroscience department in another country where Dario's memory was stored in an archive of 4,000 extracted bonding memories being used to study early attachment formation. It had not been accessed in 8 months. It was, in the language of research archives, dormant. Getting it back required a conversation with the archive director that was part negotiation, part legal argument, part the kind of moral pressure that Cass deployed rarely and deliberately. The law on memory repatriation was ambiguous, written, like most law in new industries, in the interest of the industry rather than the individual. Cass knew the ambiguities the way a locksmith knows locks, every weakness, every point where the mechanism could be moved. The archive director was not a bad person. This was what Cass always found.
The people at each step of the pipeline were not bad people. They were people operating within systems that had been designed to normalize the abnormal, to make the extraordinary feel routine. The archive director looked at the file. She looked at Cass's documentation. She looked out her window at the university courtyard for a long time. She said, "We have a repatriation protocol. It's not used often." Cass said, "I know." She said, "The memory is intact. It hasn't been altered or subdivided. That's not always the case." Cass said, "I know that too. That's why I came to you first." The repatriation took 6 weeks to process legally and 40 minutes to execute technically. Dario sat in a clinical chair, not the extraction chair, a different one, specifically designed for reintegration, and a technician placed the scanner on his head and the process ran. And when it was over, he sat very still for a long time. Cass waited. Finally, Dario said, in a voice that was doing considerable work to remain level. She had this habit. When she was first learning to focus her eyes, she would find my face and she would just hold it, like she was memorizing it. He stopped. He said, "I forgot that. I completely forgot that. And I just remembered it." He put his hands over his face. Cass waited. The clinical room was quiet. Outside, through the window, the city moved through its ordinary Tuesday business, indifferent and continuous. After a while, Dario lowered his hands. He looked at Cass. He said, "What do I owe you?" Cass's fee was a fixed rate, deliberately modest. They had calculated it to be sustainable for the business without being prohibitive for the clients, who were already, by definition, people who had been in financial difficulty. They told him the number. He said, "That's not enough. For what you..." Cass said, "It's the rate. Everyone pays the rate." He paid the rate. He stood up and put on his coat, and he paused at the door and said, "Why do you do this?" Cass said,
Because someone
should. It was not, they knew, a complete answer. The complete answer was longer and more personal, and had to do with 4 years in a clinic and the specific quality of understanding that comes from helping people give away things they don't fully understand they're giving away, and the decision they had made when they left about what to do with that understanding. But it was the part of the answer that was available for giving. The rest was theirs. Dario Fenn went home to his daughter. Cass made coffee and opened the next file. There were always more files. The market was large, and the law was slow, and the wisdom was still catching up. They worked late into the night, in the repurposed parking structure, in the city that did not know or care what was being recovered in this particular room on this particular floor. Someone had to. So Cass did.
you. 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 you.